Tonight, people in our community have been accused of selling out for financial gain, political advantages, and even for something as simple as social media clout. Woohoo! Tonight, the business of being Black are sellouts. And who better to have this spirited conversation with than guests that I personally enjoy? Please welcome author and activist Reverend Jessy Lee Peterson. Hi, Reverend Peterson. How you doing?
Hi, Tammi. All is well. Thanks for having me on.
Doctor of Clinical Psychology, Dr. Umar Johnson is with us. Dr. Umar, hey.
Good evening, Queen. Glad to be with you.
And the president of the African History Network, Michael Imhotep. Hi, Michael. How are you tonight?
How you doing, Miss Tammi Mac? Thanks for having me back.
I'm doing absolutely wonderful, and it's lovely to see your face on this show. So thank you.
Thank you.
Why is the question I start with on the Tammi Mac show every night, and tonight is no different. Why should Black people care if they're a sellout or not? I'll give it to you first, Michael.
Why should Black people? You're talking about the individual person. Why should they care?
The individual person or Black people, as in the community.
Well, if we take the community first, the collective, a person who's a sellout will purposely do things that are detrimental to the African American community for personal gain, financial position, what have you. From my basic understanding of sellouts, so I think, and this can be in various forms. So the community has to be concerned because of the damage, the harm that it can do to the collective, to the community. The individual should be concerned because of, one, they are part of a collective. It's not just this individualism that like really became popular in the 1980s here in the U.S. This rugged individualism. You're part of a collective. You're part of a whole. You're part of an African village, whether you realize it or not. So I think you have to be concerned about what you contribute to the community, what you contribute to society, what type of energy also you put out into the universe. And then there's a universal law called karma. What goes around comes around.
Yeah. All right. Reverend Jessy, why should Black people care about the word sellout?
Well, in reality, there is no such thing as sellout. Our battle is a spiritual battle. It's a warfare between good and evil. And within the Black people, most Black people today are in a fallen state. They don't know God. They don't have love. They come from screwed up families, so they're very angry. And in their state of anger, they're very judgmental because they have a big pride about them, which is the nature of Satan. And so when other Blacks overcome that fallen state and return to what is right and love what is right and love God with all their heart, soul, and might, and their neighbor as themselves, the Blacks who are in a fallen state cannot handle that because they're very judgmental. And what they try to do in their state of evil, they try to keep other Black men and women down because they hate good. And if you notice, Tammi, most Black people today don't believe in God. Most of them are evil and they hate good. And that's what the primary state is. So they'll blame somebody else for their problems rather than facing them themselves. And you can always tell a man or a woman who is in a fallen state, they blame everybody else for their failures. And most Black people are doing that today.
Dr. Umar, sellout.
I would say that when you deal with the concept of the sellout, you have to deal with it within the context of post-traumatic slavery disease. I always say that the Negro is one of the greatest creations of the modern era because the Negro is the only organism that will work against its own best interests without being paid to do so. And when we deal with the politics of selling out, we have to recognize that selling out is extremely accepted in the Black community because the Black community has never created a code of conduct for its members. Every other culture, although they are not monolithic, they do not live in a utopia, but they do have a code of conduct. We have never created such a code in the modern era. And because we haven't created a code, a lot of people can ignore the accusation that they have sold out because every person has their own definition, which is based on their own personal commitment to the Black community. So for example, to Dr. Umar Johnson, if you date outside of your race, you're a sellout, because protecting and maintaining the traditional Black family, in my opinion, is something that all of us should be in the business of doing. But for the next person, dating outside of your race may be accepted. Some people would see a Black person worshiping an image of Jesus as a white man as clearly being indicative of selling out. But someone else would say there's nothing wrong with worshiping Jesus in the image of your oppressor. And so we have different levels of commitment to the Black community, and those different levels of commitment, Tammi, dictate how high of a bar we set for one another.
So we don't have a code. The Black community has not designated a code that keeps us, I guess, not selling out. Speaking of sellout, let's make sure that we're working on the same definition of a sellout here. So, Reverend Jessy, you say that there's no such thing as a sellout, but you can admit that the word sellout does exist and that it is used, right?
Yeah, it is used, just like the word racism. We all know that there's no such thing as racism. It's a word that made up to deceive the blind. And so when they use the word sellout, it's meant to divide and conquer. But if you're not in a fallen state, meaning that Satan is not your daddy, you can see the game that's being played. Like Dr. Umar just said, he just spoke as a blind man. He has no idea what he's talking about, because there's no such thing as slavery syndrome or whatever he said. Our battle is a spiritual battle. It's either right or wrong, good or evil. And in the good old days, when boys were boys and men were men, men knew that, and they led their wives and children in the right way to go. And they did have a conduct of morality. They treated everyone they would like in the way that they would like to be treated, never mind the color. They taught their children how to work and be responsible and not blame and whine. And they didn't put it out there as though they couldn't make it. Dr. Umar Johnson just made up words.
Reverend Jessy, I don't think we should suggest that one person knows more than the other, in a sense of you saying you know it all and anyone else on the panel knows less. That's a little unfair.
Yeah, well, I may not know my flowers, but I know Dr. Umar Johnson is blind and that he's wrong. And he doesn't know God. So he's telling people words, fancy words, in order to deceive them. If you knew that our battle is a battle between good and evil, then you wouldn't make up words in order to deceive. You would tell the truth and hope that those who are blind may wake up and see the right way to go. I grew up on a plantation down in Alabama under the Jim Crow law. And back then, Black people—
were no slaves on that plantation?
Well, yeah, they had, as a matter of fact, my parents ran the plantation, but they weren't slaves when I was growing up. And the point is, Black people had a sense of morality then, and they loved what was right. They worked hard. They loved their country. They didn't blame because the men were leading the way.
Hold that thought, Reverend Jessy.
Now the Black men saw like women.
Hold that thought, Reverend Jessy. Dr. Umar, go ahead. I don't want him to bring your name up and not allow you to respond.
It's okay. I had been on Reverend Jesse's show before, and they have been trying diligently to have me come back. And one of the reasons I did not return to the show is because I believe that Jesse Lee Peterson knows better. In fact, he would be a textbook definition of a sellout, because he is the type of Black man who will bend over backwards to absolve the American white power structure of any responsibility for what happens to Black people. And like many sellouts, they always ignore, or they try to retreat away from acknowledging the role that systemic racism plays in the life of Black people. Racism is not only about the individual mistreatment of Black people, it is about the systemic mistreatment of Black people. See, racism is a system that all white people participate in, to disadvantage all members of another group. So you don't opt in, you don't opt out. And members of the target group don't opt in or opt out. But what they can do, as Jesse Lee Peterson has so effectively done in his career, is they can identify with the power structure. They can identify with white racism, and they can carve out a niche for themselves by defending the racism that is attacking Black people, as opposed to defending Black people against that racism. A Black man in America who does not stand up for his people and in turn aligns himself with the structure that is eating away at the opportunities of Black people can go very far in this country. Senator Tim Scott is an example. Jesse Lee Peterson is an example. And we will continue to create these types of personalities, Sister Tammi, if we don't come up with a code and if the Black community doesn't start holding its members accountable for dysfunctional behavior.
We're going to take a quick break and come right back on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Tonight, the business of being Black are sellouts. Are you a sellout? Is there such thing as a sellout? Let's go to the chat and find out what they're saying. Maya Magahi says, this panel is lit. Hakai says, queen. Joy says, hey, y'all, I'm sorry I got consumed at work, but I'm here now and happy to be. Incog says, uh-oh, Dr. Umar Johnson, it's about to be lit tonight. And then, hold on here. Where are we? Don Morris says, Jessy. That's how it's written. That's how I'm saying it. And then our soulmate says, all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. And then Keep Me Lovely says, imagine asking a white person, why should you care about this word? Hashtag not for sale. That's a good question. And if a white person were on my panel, they'd be asked the same question, because that's the question I start every show with every night. Why should Black people care? Now, the answers are up to you. Perhaps Black people shouldn't care. Perhaps I shouldn't be asking Black people. The answer is all up to you. I simply ask the questions. I am the host and moderator. But thank you for that. I'll get a white person on the show and ask them. Joy says there are really strong words. These are really strong words. And then let's see. Okay, Ursula O says it is on and popping tonight on the Tammi Mac Show. Rising the 80s, or I Sing the 80s. I Sing the 80s says Reverend Jesse is a walking contradiction. We're going to let you respond to that in a minute, Reverend Jesse, but I want to go to Michael here. Michael, according to Harvard law professor and author Randall L. Kennedy, the term sellout refers to Black people who knowingly or with gross negligence act against the interests of Blacks as a whole. Do you believe that those people exist?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, they exist. I was reading some of Randall Kennedy's work earlier today. Yeah, absolutely, they exist. That's what I was talking about. Those who knowingly, there's a difference between somebody who makes a mistake and doesn't know better. You share information with them, they correct their behavior. There's a difference between that and people who actually knowingly do it to profit economically or what have you, and they don't care about doing harm to African Americans, to the community, what have you. So absolutely, it exists. Now, in this, the other thing is, I think in this whole social media culture, okay, I think in this whole cancel culture also, I think sometimes the term sellout may be used prematurely or something like that. Because we're in this whole cancel culture. A lot of times if somebody says the wrong thing, you just want to cancel them or what have you. So I think you're dealing with that, but dealing with that nuance as well. But oh yeah, absolutely, sellouts exist throughout history. During slavery, after slavery, absolutely sellouts exist.
Why do you think the term is so loaded in the Black community?
Well, I think, Dr. Umar hit on something, and, I deal with things like this as well. Because of the history of slavery in this country, African Americans have largely been stripped of African history and culture, things like this. Our culture, and two of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, and Dr. Umar knows who they are. They talk about how African history and culture gives us our foundation. It gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. And this gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through, but this gives us some type of code of conduct, as Dr. Umar was talking about. So when you deal with other ethnic groups in this country, for the most part, they have their history and culture intact to a certain extent, and this gives them that code of conduct he was talking about. That gives them that foundation. Largely for us, it's been taken away from us, and many of us, in various ways, been trying to take back, reclaim certain aspects of it. But we're operating at a deficit. So sellouts definitely exist.
The Reverend Jessy, we got soulmates in the chat for you. One from None says, Jessy holds Black people accountable. But Deja E says, Reverend Jessy claims folks don't know God, but he sounds the most judgmental and hypocritical than anybody. What do you say to that? I guess she's saying hypocritical in a sense of, you say you were raised on a plantation, or your parents were raised on a plantation, but how can a plantation exist if there were no slaves? So that in itself would be kind of incongruent or hypocritical. What do you say to that?
Once upon a time, there were slaves in America. That is not happening today, and it wasn't happening when I was growing up in Alabama. This idea that slavery is the cause of the lack of morality for Black people is insane. It's just another sign of an illogical mindset. Because when I was growing up, the bathroom was outdoors, outside bathroom. I had to work the cotton fields and things like that. But it was the character of the man or the woman that counted. And when I was growing up, Black people at that time were known to be men and women of character. Today, Black people, not all, but most, are known to be men and women who lack character. The world knows that Black people are suffering not because of this phony idea of racism, slavery, systemic racism, and all that crap. They know that Black people are immoral, that they come from failing parents, and that they hate everybody, and they have no love.
But everybody that's not your story, is it, Reverend?
But they're afraid to tell the Blacks.
That's not your story, is it, Reverend Jessy? Is that your story?
No, because I was raised differently. I was raised to treat all in the way that I would like to be treated, to be fair and to be honest, because you're either children of God or children of Satan, and it has nothing to do with the color. And the children of God cannot hang out with the children of Satan because they have their hearts are wicked and they have illogical mindset. The two men that just spoke, it made no sense.
But so I'd like for you to teach me.
They don't have a logic.
Reverend Jessy, I would like for you to teach me for a moment here.
Yes.
Please break me away from tradition and what I've been taught in the white schools that I've attended that suggest that there was this society in America that wouldn't allow white people and Black people to drink from the water fountains. Did the white institutions I attend teach me that wrong, or was that correct? I'm ready to learn from you.
Well, as a matter of fact, when I was growing up, I remember the colors only signs and the whites only signs. But because most Black people loved what was right, they loved God, they knew that all white people did not feel that way. It was primarily the white people who belonged to the Democratic Party, and they didn't want Blacks to be a part of the Democratic Party. And so that's why the Blacks started the Republican Party, because the Blacks. So when we dealt with for Black only signs, for white only, common sense said it wasn't everybody. It was those who serve evil.
But it was majority of the white people. We can agree with that.
No,
right?
It wasn't the majority of Black people. It was a few.
I said majority of the white people.
I'm sorry?
Let's get back onto sellouts. Dr. Umar.
Yes, ma'am. And I would like to respond to him if I may, Sister
And it
Tammi.
wasn't a majority of whites.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr.
I want to clarify something when we talk about racism. Racism is not an individual personality fault.
It doesn't exist, man.
Racism is not about individual personality. Racism is about systemic injustice, systemic bias, systemic disproportionality, systemic discrimination. You do not opt out of racism.
Dumb.
All white people benefit from and participate in racism. So whether your ancestors owned Black people or not is irrelevant. And the reason it is irrelevant, Sister Tammi, is because even if your ancestors didn't own Black people, they worked at a job that was created because of the enslavement of Black people. So there's no such thing as slavery did not impact my family. Just like in today's America, all white people benefit from the mass incarceration of Black people. They benefit from the miseducation of Black children. They benefit from the police brutality against Black people. So I want to make sure we are clear.
What you're saying
Racism is not about individual white people choosing to hate
is
Blacks.
a lie.
Racism is about the system of racism
That's a
that
lie.
controls opportunities and resources, Sister Tammi. Racism is not about the attitude. It's about the control of resources and opportunities.
Tammi, that is not true. This is why we have to we must get to know ourselves so that we can overcome that fallen state. Dr. Umar is evil for putting out a lie like that lies like that because people are going to believe in it.
Let's refrain from calling people names.
Okay, but he's not telling the truth.
We have to refrain, Sister Tammi, but at the same time,
I
think it's important that we understand the difference between the Negro and the coon. Sister Tammi, this is a very important distinction that has to be made. The Negro is innocent in his ignorance, Sister Tammi. As Brother Michael said earlier, some people make mistakes against the race unknowingly. If you make a mistake against the race unknowingly, that was a Negro. Negroes are innocent. They think white people are more intelligent. They think Jesus is Black because they haven't been taught any better. But a coon knows better. But the coon voluntarily identifies with his oppressor because there is an agenda that he's looking to get filled. And the sad thing about Jesse Lee Peterson is he is too old to be cooning at this point in his life. And the fact that he claims to be a man of God doing the devil's work makes him a total hypocrite.
But Tammi, you know what I just want to add to that? To hear Dr. Umar and the other man to speak this way.
That's Michael.
Michael, sorry. To hear Michael and Dr. Umar speak this way is abnormal for men. Normally men, when I was growing up, they had logical mindset. But today's Black man has an illogical mindset because he thinks like a woman. He has not overcome the spirit of the woman and returned to the logical mindset.
There is nothing more effeminate than a white man defending a white power structure against Black people. There is nothing more effeminate than a Black man defending a white power structure against Black people.
Hey, why are you speaking? Hold on.
You are politically effeminate, Jesse Lee
logical
Peterson.
in their mind.
You are politically effeminate.
Women are illogical.
You are
in their
politically
mindset, right?
effeminate.
Why are you
You are defending the white power structure against your own people while you claim to be a man of God. You are a disgrace to your race, sir. You are a disgrace to your race.
And so normally the men with the logical mindset would bring the women and children to a logical mindset to help them to overcome. But now the Black men, not all but most, they think like their mothers and grandmothers. So they all think just like women, and that's why you can't get it right.
So indicting racism makes you a woman.
God, and that order is God in Christ, Christ in man, man over woman, and woman over children.
I'm not interested in a religious interpretation of racism.
Today's Black woman is over the men. And
it is a mistake to use religion to interpret political phenomena.
That's why
we're going to take a quick break and we'll come right back on the Tammi McVeigh Show on Fox Soul. Let's take a quick break. We'll come right back.